Good morning and welcome to Liverpool Transfer Daily here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke, joined by Liverpool.com editor Matt Addison as we discuss the latest Reds rumours and also discuss what the Reds rivals are up to in the transfer window. Matt, morning, and hope you're well. Obviously, the huge game to come this evening at Old Trafford. But first of all, what did you make of the weekend's Premier League action and notably Man City dropping points?
Yeah, lots of interesting stories, wasn't there, this weekend? And obviously the one that Liverpool keep an eye on is the City one. I think that was probably a result that you'd certainly take it at the start of that from a Liverpool perspective. Obviously Newcastle, a couple of goals up. You thought it could have been a little bit more, but I think, on the balance of it, I think Newcastle is going to be a difficult place to go, really. We know what the crowd is like. We know that they can be quite intense. I think we've seen, a couple of similar sort of teams like that. I think Leeds probably similar. Obviously, we saw what they did to Chelsea as well earlier in the day. So, yeah, I suppose it was just a bit of a reminder, wasn't it, that 2 games in, it's not all over. City are going to drop points at certain times, but now it's over to Liverpool, isn't it? They've obviously dropped points in their first 2. They can't really drop points tonight off the back of that City one and let them off the hook. So, yeah, it's I suppose it makes tonight a little bit bigger, but it was always one of those tonight, really, that Liverpool just have to go there and win, and hopefully that can sort of kickstart their season, if you like.
Do you think that's the case, that actually this season in the Premier League we might see more of those mid-table sides, almost as it were, begin to improve? Because a number of sides in the division do seem to have done quite smart business this summer.
Yeah, there's part of me that thinks that. There's still part of me, though, that just thinks that, City on another day, they could have easily won that match. They could have kicked on. There were certain things that they did, and I think they looked a little bit dodgy at the back at a couple of times. I think Newcastle were quite impressive, but even that, sort of the opening goal for that one, it was pretty easy for Gundogan to come in and score that. So I do think there will be, a few sort of results like that, but we've seen that before, haven't we? We've tended to see Manchester City drop points in those sort of games where you wouldn't expect them. You think of Crystal Palace and Southampton. I think they dropped points that last season. So I don't think it's going to be massively different compared to what it was last season, but I suppose the way that it might sort of change things more is in that middle of the table, maybe the teams, maybe your Arsenals or Chelsea's and teams like that trying to get into the top 4. Maybe that is a bit where we'll kind of see that a little bit more. I think for me, certainly City and hopefully you'd expect Liverpool as well at some point. I think they probably will just be the top 2 again. I think ultimately they are still enough better than the rest of the teams that it should be, still sort of 90 plus points that they'll both be on at the end of the season. But it'd be interesting. I think, for Liverpool, you've got to hope that, City do drop points in more of those types of matches, because already, obviously, we've seen Liverpool do that twice. So yeah, I think that there will be drop points at certain times, but I don't think it's going to be completely different to what we've seen in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Well, make sure you get involved in the comments section this morning here on Transfer Daily. Billy, they're saying the start of the seasons are always unpredictable. That definitely is the case. And morning to Kumar, morning to you guys. As I say, get your comments and questions in. We will, of course, get to your questions as we do go through the course of the show. But Matt, let's check in then on the transfer rumour mill and see what's going on. And it was something we spoke about on Friday's edition of Moises Caicedo of Brighton and Hove Albion, constantly at the moment gaining interest from Liverpool and a number of clubs.
Yeah, it's a long line of clubs. I mean, the latest sort of report comes from Ecuador, obviously his native country, and the suggestion is that Liverpool and Manchester United are both interested in him. Probably inevitably that the sort of preference, according to that report, is that he would come to Liverpool. The suggestion is that Liverpool are preparing a bid. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. He's been a player that I've had an eye on really for a little while. I thought he was interesting when he came in. They paid, I think, 4 or 5 million for him in about February 2021, I think it was. So he's been there a little bit of time, but I think kind of always that the eye really was that Yves Bissouma was going to move on and he was going to be that kind of succession plan. And we've seen that a lot with Brighton. They find these gems, they let them settle in and develop, and almost similar to at Liverpool, where you sort of see Fabinho had a few months and Andy Robertson and all the rest of those examples. It does seem to be a little bit similar with Brighton, and obviously now we've got the sort of midfield 2 of him and Alexis McAllister, I think, has started the season really impressively as well. all of those players who've kind of just been given the opportunity really to be coached and eased into life in the Premier League. And suddenly you're starting to see it. I think he started the last 7 or 8 games of last season, now has started a couple this season. He seems to be, a really talented player, and it's no real surprise that the teams are looking at him. I think it would be a surprise if Liverpool went for him this summer, but possibly, if he has, a full season at Brighton this summer, it could quite easily be that he's the next one to follow Marc Cucurella, Ben White, Yves Bissouma. They've got that kind of conveyor belt of talent, really, where they bring them in, develop them, give them a bit of Premier League experience. And I think Graham Potter said it himself, actually, over the weekend. He knows, he's aware that at certain times that there is going to be money put on the table that Brighton just can't turn down. And he kind of admitted, really, it wasn't an issue that Cucurella had moved on and certain players had been lost. That was just part of the job, really, for him. So, yeah, I think for Brighton to take the next step, they're going to have to try and keep 1 or 2 of these players. But we've seen that, a number of times with Southampton, with Leicester, with all of these clubs that are trying to take that next step. It can be quite difficult, but yeah, I think he'll be all right for this season in terms of Caicedo. I'd be surprised if he left this summer, but certainly, definitely one to watch out for the future.
Yeah, no, Brighton's recruitment, I think up there with Brentford and Liverpool are some of the smartest recruiters in the Premier League. I was looking at something over the course of the weekend that said that their squad had been put together for 95 million over the last 2 summers. They've recruited 110 million in the sales of Ben White and Marc Cucurella alone. And as you say, they've also sold Yves Bissouma in that time as well. They really do know what they're doing. Before we get on to the second point, Bruce has got in touch, and probably worth noting on the Liverpool midfield, given we've just been speaking about a potential midfield arrival. Says, morning, is it true Keita's unhappy with his game time? If so, why is Klopp keeping a player he doesn't trust enough to play more often? A number of people getting involved in the chat box on this one. But Matt, what's your take on Naby Keita? Because Jurgen Klopp has spoken about it in a number of he had 3 sections to his press conference ahead of the game with Manchester United. He was asked about Naby Keita in a couple of those as well, and underlined the fact that really he doesn't see Naby Keita going anywhere, and if he did, there would already have to be a replacement lined up.
Yeah, that was the most important point. I think the stories, I think it's Sky Germany, isn't it, reporting it, Florian Plettenberg, who we've actually spoken to on the channel, I think last summer around something else, was reporting that Naby could even leave this summer, but Jurgen Klopp definitively kind of ruling that out, because I think it just wouldn't make any sense to lose him at this point. I think for Liverpool, if it came to it, they'd rather lose him on a free next summer than let him go now and not have a replacement. I think that is pretty important. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. I mean, the story is that he's not particularly happy with his game time, and possibly the Manchester United game tonight, if he doesn't play in that could sort of lead into further sort of stories of him wanting to leave. But I just don't know whether he can really be in a position at Liverpool where he can be unhappy. I know he was fit for a lot of last season. I think he started 19 games across the Premier League and the Champions League. So yeah, of course, I can see from his perspective that he probably would like to play a little bit more than that. But you've got to be honest, last season was the first season where he was fit enough to play in more of those matches. Before that, it wasn't a case of him not being picked. It was just simply a case that he was only ever fit for 3 or 4 games in a row. I think he's only ever started 3 or 4 games in a row for Liverpool in the Premier League. He's never managed to be fit long enough to play more than those sort of numbers. So I don't know. It seems a little bit strange to me. At the same time, I can see a situation where he could basically go to another league, another team, and play a much bigger role in terms of kind of playing every week and nailing down a starting place, but also probably be looking at scoring and being that player that he was at Leipzig. I don't think necessarily anybody is going to be able to do that within the way that Liverpool's midfield functions, but I think probably he's looking at it and thinking that he can maybe have a bigger impact elsewhere potentially. But I think the bottom line is Liverpool want to keep him. He's a really good squad player. He's probably never going to be the first name on the midfield team sheet for Liverpool, with so many players in front of him. And you're looking at potential for Jude Bellingham next summer. You'd imagine that Harvey Elliott is going to nail himself down in there at some point soon. I can kind of see why he would look at it and think that he's probably not going to be in that first 3 for Liverpool for the foreseeable future, even though he's in his peak and even though he's fit at this moment in time. But yeah, for me, I think I can see why Liverpool want to keep him, because as a squad player. I think he can be really valuable, and it wouldn't shock me at all if he started tonight. He did really well at Old Trafford last summer. I think Liverpool have, they've got to try and keep hold of him, but ultimately, if he wants to go, I think possibly it might be a free transfer next summer.
Yeah, I think 10 days left of the window. It's probably nigh on impossible. A, he goes, and B, Liverpool find a replacement. But stranger things have happened. I'm going to say Darren here is said that he trusts that he isn't fit enough most of the time. Such a shame. Naby can change a game in Liverpool's favour at any time. I mean, as I say, loads of people getting in touch. And Kumar's also said himself he really hopes that Elliott can step up and exceed all expectations for this season and beyond, and also says if Naby really wants to leave, he should be let to go. He'd prefer Sander Berger in the team for a smaller fee. And Mr. Sinclair makes a really good point. And our second point was to talk about Matheus Nunes, who, of course, Liverpool reportedly were looking at this summer. In the end, didn't make a move. He's gone to Wolves and made his debut over the weekend. But Mr. Sinclair says we do everything next summer. We'll probably need 3 midfielders. There are 4 players out of contract. He just can't see it happening. It is an awful lot to look to do, especially given that's only one area of the team that would need strengthening. I'm still an advocate, probably, of saying Liverpool are maybe a wide forward or a forward option short. So that would then be at least 4 players Liverpool are looking to recruit.
Yeah, they have sort of given themselves a little bit more to do, and I think it's an interesting situation, isn't it? I suppose you'd probably expect at this point that Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain could leave. Probably on balance, you'd probably say that James Milner would leave at the end of this season, but you just never know. I think we've probably said that for 2 years now, and he's just given that 1-year extension. If he does have a decent role to play this season, it can't be completely ruled out, I don't think, in terms of him having another 12 months. So there is a little bit to think about. Obviously, Naby Keita is one that Liverpool probably had always assumed would sign a new contract and wouldn't be one that would leave, but possibly that could change. They have given themselves a fair bit to do, and I think that's probably the biggest argument you could say, really, in terms of them going out and signing someone this summer in midfield. Obviously, they haven't done it. It doesn't look like they're going to at this point, but I think that was the biggest point, really. It's less for me about the numbers that they've got in that area, but more about, if they do get Jude Bellingham next summer, you probably would have wanted one that could come in this summer as well to kind of sort of bridge that gap and not do everything all at once. But in terms of who that is, I mean, it would be a difficult one. Matheus Nunes is obviously one that people have taken a look at this weekend, and particularly in that first half against Tottenham, I saw a lot of people enjoying his performance. I was at the academy, actually, so I didn't get to see that match, but by all accounts did really well. And I think in the Telegraph, John Percy reporting that Liverpool are really interested in him, and I think there's kind of a feeling at Wolves that he might only be there one season and he'd move on. So I don't know. That one was the one I think that you'd look at and possibly think was a little bit strange if it's true that Liverpool do have an interest in him and could maybe go back in for him next summer. Obviously, that would be then a pretty big price hike, even though he'd have a year of Premier League experience possibly. That is one that you might look at and think they could have done this summer. But yeah, we've said it all along. If there was someone out there that they thought was perfect, they would have gone and done it. But they just didn't feel that was the case, really. So I don't know. It's an interesting one that they've given themselves more to do next summer. But I suppose the flip side of that is that they might have a better idea of where Tyler Morton's at. They might have a better idea of where Curtis Jones is at. Maybe 1 or 2 of those players can step up.
It's an awful lot to keep asking, though, of the young players to step up at the same time, isn't it? That is the way, but equally, I suppose if the pathway is there, it does have to be trusted. We're going to get to a couple of your questions then, and Kumar says that he really hopes that Liverpool sign at least 2 midfielders next summer. Bellingham's going to be crucial. Real Madrid will be after him, need to be proactive, of course, with Casemiro going to Manchester United, or seemingly looking as though that's going to happen. United, I think at stage 1, Matt, have announcing the transfer about 5 times, as they seem to do these days. They've announced that they've got an agreement in place with Real Madrid that will give Madrid some cash to spend. Kumar's also mentioned Pedro Neto this morning. The Athletic reporting that Arsenal have identified him as their primary target ahead of the close of the transfer window. And I mean, that's a crucial thing now, isn't it? It's looking actually at how other clubs' moves in the market may well affect Liverpool. Yeah,
I mean, Pedro Neto, I absolutely love him. I think he'd be absolutely brilliant. I think it would be a slight risk at this point for anyone. I think if Arsenal went for him, they'd have to end up spending quite a lot of money on him. And I think he's only just come back from that injury. I think probably
only just signed a new contract as well through to 2027 in February.
Yeah, and I think the way that Liverpool would look at it, if they were ever interested in a player in that sort of situation, is they'd probably give him one more season just to see what he's like, to make sure he comes back from that injury this season, and possibly then look at it next summer. I mean, yeah, it's one of those that I really like him as a footballer. I think he's absolutely brilliant, and I can see him being one that might be on Liverpool's radar at some point. But I suppose it's almost that Luis Diaz situation, isn't it? Of if Liverpool want him, similar with Matheus Nunes. To be fair, there was enough teams interested in him this summer that if they really wanted him, they would have had to have kind of accelerated that plan and gone for it. But yeah, Pedro Neto, I think for Arsenal would be a brilliant signing, but for Liverpool and one or two others as well, they should be taking a look at it. But I can see why it wouldn't be this summer. I think, like I say, you just want to give him that extra bit of time to make sure he's 100% over that injury and back to those previous levels, because it was the season before last, he was comfortably Wolves' best player. He was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, if he does get back to that level 100%, he won't be at Wolves for long.
Yeah, the chat box is absolutely alive. One more before we go, Matt, but I'm just going to read a few out. Bruce says, do you think Liverpool need more flexibility in the way we operate in the market? Jude could be another Mbappe. That was a fear I was sort of mentioning a couple of weeks ago. I thought that Liverpool needed to move first in the market and move fast, because seen it with a couple of players where these sagas have begun to develop and eventually Liverpool seem to get priced out of it by being part of an auction. A reluctant socialist says, we're waiting on Bellingham. If we're waiting on Bellingham, that's a gross negligence. Real have announced an interest, so we can't and won't spend as much. Bye Jude. Will be left buying our second or third choice. And that's that for the transfer talk then. But before tonight's game, Bill Bond asks a question. Let's end with a match-related one. Where are the goals coming from? Having lost Sadio and Nunes is suspended. Matt, what about tonight? Where are the goals coming from?
I would suggest that the goals are coming from Mohamed Salah. I think there's a bit of pressure on his shoulders. I think Luis Diaz as well, I think is a big goal threat, which I am very much looking forward to seeing him across the course of this season. I think we saw, certainly in the first half of last season when he was at Porto, he got, 16 goals in that first period before he signed for Liverpool. We've not quite seen him click into goal scoring form, but obviously scored last week. So yeah, I think those two are kind of big hopes, really. And you've got to hope at some point as well that maybe one or two of the midfielders chip in with a couple of goals. Obviously, we mentioned Naby Keita before. There's definitely, a possibility for someone like him to pop up with it. But yeah, with the injuries and the suspensions, obviously Diogo Jota coming back as well, I think he's going to have a big season. But yeah, Salah, Diaz, they should be absolutely ready to go out and really tear the back line of Manchester United apart. And Roberto Firmino as well. I think that the way that Brentford and Brighton have taken apart United in recent weeks, even the back end of last season, we saw very similar as well. I think this is a game that could really be tailor-made for the way that Firmino presses. If Liverpool can win the ball back high up the pitch, give it to Salah and Diaz, Liverpool should be in business.
Yeah, Kumar reckons Salah and Diaz are the men, and Will reckons he can see Bobby getting on the score sheet tonight, and he hopes that it's going to be 3-0 to the Reds. Salah, Diaz and Bobby all to score. I'd say that'd be lovely, but it was 5-0 in the end at Old Trafford last year, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility. Terry's also got in touch, says Diaz, Mo and Firmino, that's where the goals will come from tonight. So let's wait and see if there is as much optimism following full time at Old Trafford. Of course, here on the Blood Red channel, we'll bring you the debrief. We'll bring you Jurgen Klopp's post-match press conference and plenty of reaction as well as that across on the Liverpool Echo and Liverpool.com websites. Do check it all out. But from myself, Guy Clarke and Matt Addison, thanks for joining us this morning here on the Transfer Daily. You've been absolutely brilliant in the chat box from us too. Until next time, it's bye for now.